First of all, I welcome everybody on this program. This is the third session for We Connect, which is an endeavor by Shroffs Foundation Trust to bring in wisdom and knowledge into the development sector. We had Professor Jaideep Prabhu delivering his first session, followed by Dr. Mukul Asher in the last session, previous one. And today we are privileged to have with us Shri Fernandez, who is a renowned person, first chairman of NAPFIN, which is NABARD Financial Organization, also considered to be the founder of Microfinance in India, a Padma Shri Awardee. I welcome Mr. Fernandez. I request Tiwari Sahib to give a brief introduction to the keynote speaker, followed with which we will have about 40 to 45 minutes of discourse from Mr. Fernandez, followed by question and answer session. With that, I request Tiwari Sahib to introduce the speaker and begin the session for the day. Thank you very much.
Fernandez ji, some 25 years ago, when I had an occasion to visit Bangalore and be part of some team to see the self-help groups of women in Hosur. And that was my first exposure to microfinance or and the theoretical knowledge was okay. But when I saw the self-help group of women, it was very clear that there was something different. And the practical is much better than what we read in theory. And since then, I have frequently visited Mr. Fernandez for ideas, suggestions, guidance, and learning. And I treat him as my guru, social sector. But my time in social sector started, and Mr. Fernandez was the guru. So during the last 25 years of my interaction with him, I have learned a lot from him, and he has given me full access to his field work, his organization, and wherever I wanted to go, I was able to go and learn. And another very interesting aspect is that Mr. Fernandez is a very jovial person, very unassuming, having global experience, but his social sector, development sector jokes are very, in fact, memorable. I hope he cites one or two such examples. I'm very sure that we'll learn a lot from him. And we had requested Mr. Fernandez to talk about some of the, say, innovations which were tried his time in Merida and elsewhere. So with this, I will close and hand over the session to Mr. Fernandez. Welcome, Fernandez sir.
Welcome, and thank you very much for spending your time with me this afternoon. I'd like to thank Vikas, our CEO of Shroff, for all the preparation that he has done. Thank you, Vikas. And Anand Mohan Tiwari, my old friend, I've worked together with him when he was in Delhi, and we both worked on the whole self-help group movement in 7 states. He was one of the champions in the government, and I have a great respect for him. So welcome and thank you for introducing me. I personally have taught development. I have funded it in the World Bank and Canadian government. And finally, I decided to implement it for the last 30 years. And it was during implementing it where I tried to put in practice what I had taught, what I had funded. I discovered that I need to be totally de-schooled. I had to rethink I changed my whole set of beliefs, both religious, political, and even developmental. And what I'm going to share with you is something about my own experience, what I call my experiential capital. You know, the title of the top of today's speech is Tinkering beyond conventional approaches in the development sector. Now, why do we need to tinker in development? And the first point is that we need what are the development is not in writing, it is in the field. So what we need to look at first is the features of the ecosystem in which development operates. And this country is very diverse. The first feature is diversity. Soils, rainfall, communication facilities, traditional practices, cultural differences, history, all differ, even within short distances. We need local solutions. We need to get people involved to find these local solutions. We need customization or customer obsession today. This diversity to me is a strength and must be incorporated in project design. Yet we are conditioned to view diversity as an obstacle, and very often we use technology to reduce the diversity and to make it uniform. But the project is usually designed by experts, government, private, who tend to have a uniform solution, one fits all. One strategies are selected on averages, no room for flexibility. Project designers are conditioned by their education, their family. They carry a certain baggage. All of us need to be deschooled. We need to understand and empathize with the informal sector to get rid of this baggage. And NGOs have to work in partnership with government to achieve anything on scale. To work with government and to achieve on scale, however, we need champions in the government who are already deschooled. And I will give you some examples at the end, four projects where we had them. Slide 3. Now, the next feature of the development ecosystem is the clients in the development sector mainly live and work in the informal sector. Now, this is large. Almost 50% of the GDP, it provides 90% of employment. Hence, it must be factored into planning, not just with the objective of inclusion in the formal sector. This requires time, but we need to include them by tinkering with or even changing the project design to accommodate this large sector here and now. In the long run, they're all dead. Inclusion will take a long time and several intermediate steps which the development project could provide. How is it going to do this is what we will see. Clients are also risk prone, chiefly in agricultural related sector. Yet rural people have coped with risks and uncertainty and survived in a situation of scarce resources. They must be good managers. They have strengths. The project should build on these strengths, which helps them to participate in the project process very effectively. Largely, the clients are also largely poor and vulnerable people. They do not fit readily into the formal systems. They have their own survival systems. They need a few steps before they can fit into the formal system. Opening an account in the formal bank does not automatically include them in growth. Much more is required. Therefore, the project must have a broad strategy and provide people with space to participate in every stage: design, planning, budgeting, finance management, implementation. This is the whole value chain of the development process. This is a repetition of slide 2 because we have the government and private who are the funders. They are important actors in the ecosystem. And they, again, as I said before, their staff are highly qualified, but they have biases arising from education, family, and degrees. They are driven by project demands to complete within a time frame and the demand for the impact to be measurable. This is getting very prominent. But while some outcomes can be measured, the level of people's participation does not lend itself easily to measure. And very often we say what cannot be measured does not exist today. But Participation is long-term, impact is long-term, yet it is crucial for the success of the project. How do you give people this space in this situation? Once again, I say you need champions in government because we work with government. And as I often say, I have several champions in government who are willing to support innovation. In all the 4 experiences I will describe later, we were fortunate to have these champions. In fact, over the last 40 years working with the government, I divide bureaucrats in 4 or 5 sectors. One is the bureaucrat he's the bureaucrat who does what he's told. Then you have the good bureaucrat who is told to do something and he tells his boss, well, these are the obstacles, these are the problems, but he doesn't do anything more. Then you have the complete bureaucrat who says, these are the problems, these are the obstacles, but this is how you can solve them. But he will not be proactive in solving them. And then you have the enterprising bureaucrat who will not only tell his boss the problems, but he'll be proactive in solving them. And this is where the champions fit into this category. There are also enterprising bureaucrats who take some money out of the clients for helping them, but that's another story. NGOs can and do trigger innovations in development, but they can do this in small areas. To go to scale, they need to work with government. But government projects require tinkering to make an impact and to be sustainable. The NGOs too need to have an approach which builds trust, both with government and clients. And NGOs fall in 4 broad categories. One is the service delivery NGOs, absolutely essential, doing great work, filling up the gaps in government. Then you have the activists. They play a very good role, but they're a different set of people. The media approaches them and they highlight problems. Then you have the actionists, and in the actionists you have one group that takes a project and implements it, and you have another group that takes a project, discusses it with the people, tinkers with it, modifies it, brings people into it and implements it. I'm talking about this group of actionists. So all these challenges that you have in government and in the development sector, which is diverse, which is risk-prone, etc., they can be met if we have the following. And tinkering requires what? A supportive ecosystem, both in government and private sector. This is even true for all the startups. I was talking to Harry Menon of Big Basket the other day, and he said many of his original enterprises didn't succeed because the ecosystem was not there. This is true in development too. You need relations of trust at the bottom amongst the founders and the interveners in development. Who are they? Government, private sector, NGOs, and people's institutions. There must be relationships of trust there, just as you need relationships of trust among the founders of any private company. But in development, you also need relationships of trust in the last mile. If you don't have that, it won't work. If Big Basket doesn't have relations of trust with each farmer, it won't work. And this is the crux of development, that you need to have relationships of trust with the people that you're working. Next, interaction with clients and feedback without files. In development jargon, we call this participation. In the private sector, you call it marketing, information, data, customer-centric, to customer obsession. Tinkering requires champions in government and the private sector, willing to listen and to provide space for change. To achieve effective participation, by effective I mean that people are involved at every stage of the development process, from design to planning to budgeting to managing finance into implementation. That's what I mean by effective participation. We in Maharada follow the advice of Mahatma Gandhi. Look at the face of the poor, listen, share their lives, ask them. So all our staff live in the villages. We have campuses in the villages, not in Bangalore. Bangalore office is the smallest office. We have about 15 offices, and they're all in the rural areas, and they have sub offices. And we use two participatory methods. One is participatory rural appraisal, which is PRA, which helps us to deepen people's participation at every stage of the project: design, planning, budgeting, implementation, leading to sustainability, and to discover traditional solutions to problems. The other we use is appreciative inquiry. We call it AI. And this is very important because it helps us to identify the strengths of the people on which strategies should develop. We learned in the past when I studied, we had to look at needs. What are the needs? What are the list of needs of people? What is the problem tree? But we found and we discovered in our participation with people that if you build on needs, you make people constantly dependent on you. They transfer the problem on your back. You have the money, you have the expertise, you have the image, and they never get to solving the problem. But if you help them to identify the problems of the past through appreciative inquiry and help them to see how they solve their own problems, you're building on strengths. And there are several strengths we discovered, like affinity, relations of trust, which exist already before we went into the picture. Traditional methods of health, of management of soil and water conservation of different crops, variety of crops in the field. These are all the lessons we learned through appreciative inquiry, how people suffered during stressful times, and we tried to help them to implement them again. What did we learn? What did we learn as a result of these participatory processes? That the last mile must be managed by people, preferably by their institutions, self-help groups, watershed associations, farmer producer organizations, based on affinity, trust, shared interest. Project strategy needs to make people the partners, people and their institutions, the partners and the leaders. But we also learned that there are underlying power relations which keep the poor excluded and dependent. People's institutions are able to bypass them like the SAGs. These power relations are there. When I came to implement programs, we were taught that don't give a person a fish, but teach them to fish. But we realized that it is not enough to teach people to fish, but because they cannot reach the river. So these power relations have to be taken into consideration, and I think we need to be careful. It was necessary, we also found, to invest in building a team to share a common vision to achieve scale. We invested in management training in-house, and that we gave priority to. We also learned not to rush into accepting programs until a supportive ecosystem is in place. We also learned not to announce success because social change takes time. We also learned, and this I think is also common to the private sector and to new startups, do not get imprisoned in an ideology or a startup which is struggling. This limits choices and alternate solutions. Study the local market surveys, foster effective participation. On the growth issue, the desire for scale, there's always this talk of scale. We found that it's no need to respond to requests to start MyRada all over the country. Instead, invite those interested to visit and interact with people who had taken the lead in their own growth. We established 9 training centers, campuses in all our projects. People came, lived there, share ideas and strategies. We did not want to plant the flag all over. And this is one mistake I think that NGOs make, to plant the flag all over. Why did we tinker and how? I now give you 4 examples drawn from our experience where we had to tinker and why. The the project strategy as given in design was not broad enough. It had to be broadened. Mairada's program with the sex workers and HIV/AIDS was the example. 2, the strategy was not appropriate at all to achieve the objective and had to be changed. This was the example I'm giving you is Mairada's program with the Devadasis. 3, we had to bring new stakeholders into the program. And who were the new stakeholders? People and their institutions in watershed management. When we had the first meeting of watershed management in somewhere early mid-80s in Delhi, we had a meeting for 2 hours with the government staff, but the word people was not mentioned. And the last, fourth one is existing institutions like the primary agricultural cooperatives. We started working with them because they are the institutions of development designed by the government, dealing mainly with credit. We found them structurally excluding the poor, and I'll explain this to you. And we found that tinkering did not work. It was not enough. So a parallel system emerged, which was the self-help groups. Now, cooperatives dealing with commodities like milk, on the other hand, including the small producer. So that's fine. But those dealing with credit, I will explain to you, they began to, we found they exploited people much more than they helped people. I'll therefore explain these 4 to you now in a little more detail. The first one is the project strategy as given in design was not broad enough. This example is from our HIV/AIDS project with sex workers. What was the objective? To change high-risk sexual habits among sex workers. And what was the strategy? To increase the use of condoms and decrease the number of clients. But using our approach, as I told you so far, we went to the people and we spent a lot of time with them. It was led by one of my colleagues, Dr. Maya Mascarenhas. She took the lead and she has documented her experience in the 50 years of learning, the book I wrote. And what did we find in our discussion with people? The high risk was there, but they were more interested in decreasing their vulnerability. And we found that unless we decrease their vulnerability, the objective of reducing high risk would not be achieved. And what were the causes of vulnerability? First, dominance of the male client who refused to use the condom, lack of alternate livelihood sources. 3, difficulty to access entitlements to healthcare services provided by government. And 4, absence of an institution of sex workers to support them and provide a safety net against oppression from pimps and harassment from the police. What became clear was that unless the project strategy included all these inputs to decrease vulnerability, high-risk sexual habits without sex without the condom, and a large number of clients would continue. So we broadened our strategy. We called it tinkering to make it an ABC4DE strategy. A for awareness, B for behavioral change. To control high-risk activities, awareness is not enough. And how did we work on behavioral change? By C4, C for continence, C for condom promotion, C for community pressure. This was the most important to bring about behavioral change. We formed small groups of sex workers. We call them Saukya groups. And they met regularly and discussed what issues they were faced. And they were able to tackle anybody who came really and harassed people and oppressed people. And this spread very rapidly. And I must say, we got, after a period, tremendous support from the police on this issue. Now, D was for medical drugs to treat STI, and E for empowerment based on sustainable alternative livelihoods. So we had to broaden the whole strategy. This was what tinkering did. But we could do this because we had a very supportive ecosystem. The decision by government, they formed, they were some champions, I think, in the government who enabled us to do this. I remember Vandana Gurunani at state level, and we had Anuradha Gupta and Keshav Desi Raju and Sujata Rao at Delhi level. So they really helped us. Like, without these champions, really nothing would have gone ahead. The second program where we were able to tinker was the Devadasi program. You know who are Devadasis? Are not sex workers. They have long-term relationships with a single man. They have children by him, but the children don't take his name. And he pays the Devadasi and her family with certain amount of money. Now here again, government asked us to rehabilitate Devadasis. So they prepared the project design. What was the objective? To rehabilitate the Devadasis. What was the strategy? To take all the Devadasis together and settle them in a colony far away from where they lived, where they would be given 2 acres of land and supported to start livelihood activities like animal husbandry and weaving. Now, we asked government time to check this out again. We selected one of our senior staff, Lata Mala, a postgraduate who had a strong determination to correct gender biases, to lead the program. She moved to the field with a few selected staffs and spent time in the villages. The feedback was this: the Devadasis were not willing to move far away into a colony. They wanted to stay with or near their families. Their men provided money to the families. Secondly, they also said that if you open a colony, it would become a red light area and we would be equated with sex workers. So we suggested to government a change in strategy, a total change. From physical rehabilitation, we went to a change in the mindset of Devadasis and the culture or thinking of general public. We organized Devadasis to prevent dedication of the girl child, which is often done in secret, to goddess Yellamma, and to empower the Devadasis to lead the way out of this exploitative system. We did this to forming groups of self-help groups of Devadasis and a major organization called MAS, it's a long name, which of ex-Devadasis. There are about 5,000 in that society today. So what happened? What did we do to change the mindset, to change the general attitude? We had a lot of street theater, meetings with people during jatras, visit festivals, and more importantly, we won over the Lingayat Swamijis who joined us in this campaign, and they said they were able to reinterpret the Devadasi system. They said you need not dedicate the child, it should be removed. Your blessings of Devadasis would still be valid even if they are not really subject to all this oppression. And they gave a whole new meaning to the Devadasi program. So we had these champions in the whole religious sector. I remember one night, but at the same time, they warned us to be careful because it would take a long time to really solve this problem. They told us a story, I remember. They said, anyhow. So we had to raise funds, of course, for this, which we did. Otherwise, we would not. And thanks to Novib, we got some money. This Apex Society of Devadasis is still functioning. And I must mention that the president was a woman called Sittava Jodati. In 92, when we first went there, she's the Devadasi and she ran away from us. And after getting her in and training her for 20 years, she became the president of this organization, MAS. And 3 years ago, she got the Padma Shri Award. 2 years ago. So that was quite an achievement. We had great support, champions in government. I remember Anita Kaul, Vandana Gurunani, Vandita Sharma. They were who helped us to really completely change the strategy in this project. So this is the ecosystem required. The third program we tinkered was the watershed program. And we had a good ecosystem again, because in Karnataka, government had given priority to the Panchayat Raj, to bring people into the system. And the development sector used this in the watershed program and brought people into development. We had Dr. P.R. Naik and Sri Meenakshi Sundaram, the secretary and the development commissioner, who were the champions. We managed to work together with the government. We developed watershed institutions. They did the planning. We used participatory appraisal. They did the design of the project. We gave them the money. Government gave them the money. They managed it. And as a result, there was a long-term sustainability in this project. I remember at the national level, Ugandar was the champion. And when we had our first meeting in Delhi with officers who handled watershed programs in India, we had a meeting. It lasted 1 hour, but they never mentioned the word people. And their problems were that they would implement the bunding mainly to prevent silting of large dams, but the farmers would break the bunds the next year. So we said, why don't you get the farmers involved? So we introduced the whole concept of farmers' participation in micro watersheds, thanks to Uganda and a few others. But it took a lot of work to really at the national level. And lastly, and I'll stop there, was the self-help groups. We started working with the PACs, with the primary agricultural cooperative societies, because that's the development organization that the government really provides, the Panchayat for governance and the cooperatives for development. But although the cooperative idea is good, when we started working with the PACs, we discovered a lot of problems. We discovered that the PACs were controlled by the powerful families in the village, secretary, president, and treasurer. And what I discovered after living with them for some time, I found that the president, secretary, and treasurer were borrowing money at 7 and 8% interest and on lending it to everybody else at 30% interest. And they were also saying, if you take the loans, you have to come and work on our farm early. Soon as it rains, you have to plow our fields, and a host of others. I can give you 10 examples of how they use the whole cooperative system to really strengthen those relationships which were not very equal. This was what I referred to as unequal relationships of power, that it's not enough to teach people to fish. So what happened as a result of this, the poorer people said, we have to do something about this. And they came together in groups and said, we will return money to the but to Mairada, not to the cooperative. But after many discussions, we were able to tell them, why don't we have meetings? They came in groups of 14 or 15, and we met regularly, and we are able to return the money to the group. And that is how the group fund of each self-help group started way back in 1985. So that was the beginning. And when they wanted some money, we said, well, why don't you take from the savings that you've had? And that's how the self-help group started working in someone 85, 86. In 87 or 86, we went to NABARD and we got ₹1 million to match the savings of the group and to train them how to meet, how to study, how to decide, how to participate. We have a training manual of about 14 modules. And as a result of that, there were a lot of studies done in the late 80s. And the government, and here is the ecosystem, the support made. RBI and NABARD took 3 decisions. One, to allow the banks to lend to unregistered groups. Let's thank Dr. Rangarajan for that. Said if the group works together, keeps records of accounts, meetings, decisions, banks should lend to them. 2, let the bank give a bulk loan to the self-help group and let the group decide on individual loans. And so they decided on the size of the loans, on the interest. They changed the interest from depending if it was for a health purpose, so whether it was for agriculture or for a shop. And the third was without security. That was not difficult. These 3 were crucial decisions taken by RBI and NABARD, thanks to Dr. Rangarajan thanks to Dr. P.R. Naik, who was the chairman of NABARD. Rangarajan, of course, was governor of RBI. And then several NABARD chairmen later, like Kotaya, Nanda, these people pushed the whole idea. And so as a result of this ecosystem, we were able to really make the self-help groups a national movement, of course, and we hope that they continue as people's movements and is not become a government appendages or part of the government's delivery system. So in this fourth case, we started tinkering and ended up creating something new. But once again, it was on scale, thanks to the ecosystem, thanks to champions within the organization. The lessons we learned were two or three. Don't rush, remain slow, and development and change doesn't happen very fast. Respect diversity, get people involved. The whole value chain in development has to involve people. And unless you are able to do this in an effective manner, much of our impact of our work is short-lived and is not sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a wonderful discourse and when some very, very specific examples for us to learn, whether it is differential interest rates that you spoke about or the other points in terms of appreciative inquiry or the fact that access is as important as water and fish. So I think these are some very critical points. I would now like to open the floor for the audience to ask the questions, please. The one who desires to ask the question can please unmute from your phone and ask the question. Till the time, sir, the others technically get into it, I would like to have a query, small query, if you can resolve and guide us on. For sustainable institution building, sir, I want to understand what can be done to ensure that elite captures and information asymmetry is, kind of nullified.
What did you say? Sustainable, what can be done for
institution, building a
sustainable institutions?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I think very briefly, if we looked at the self-help group seems to have a lot of lessons that for us. First and foremost, we did not impose the criteria for choice of members of the institution. We conducted what we call wealth ranking, where the people of the village identified all the poor people. And very often people whom we thought were not poor and who were poor, and vice versa. Once we had all the poor, we asked them to form their own groups. And what we found was that there are traditional relationships of affinity among people in this country, thank God, of trust. These relations of affinity are relationships of trust, mutual support, and these exist. So we said, you form your groups according to you self-select your members. So one of the, I think, rules of association is that the members should be self-selected. Not you don't come out and say you are a beneficiary if you have gray hair, if you have no roof, if you have, for example, one of the criteria was if a woman is poor if she doesn't have land. But we had a woman who was registered as not poor because she had 5 tamarind trees in another village, and each tamarind tree brought her 10,000 rupees. So you see, so we have to look at what is, so we had another example of family with 20 acres of land. They were put as poor because there was not a single person in the family who could work. They were all ill. So the criteria has to come from people. Secondly, you have to invest in what I call institutional capacity building. If you do not do this, then you can't expect an institution to grow overnight. It's not enough to invest in bookkeeping and this. How to meet, how to struggle, how to assess, how to participate, how do you build an institution? This is important. We have a training manual for that. I can share it with you. Tiwari Saab translated it in Hindi, so it should be ready. I hope he has a copy with him when he was in Delhi. And it has been translated in Indonesian, Bhasha Indonesia, it has been translated Myanmarese, it's all over the world. It's a very practical training manual with games, It's not a resource book. It's a practical training manual. Most of what I see is the resource books. So you need institutional capacity building. Third, you need to have something to keep them going. Self-help groups keep them going because there's savings, there's loans and things like that. They also are involved. Many of them have stood for election. In the late 90s, we had about 500 of them elected to the panchayats, and today there must be many more. So they get into the power system also. So, but it's important to let them be self-selected. Secondly, it's important to invest in institutional capacity building. And thirdly, it's important to have an activity that keeps them going. Otherwise, you see, it won't work. And lastly, an institution should be appropriate to the objective to be managed, or the resource objective to be achieved, or resource to be managed. An institution should be appropriate to the objective to be achieved, or resource to be managed. If you have one institution and wanted to do everything else like we have in government, it's not going to work. You need appropriate. A self-help group is not a watershed institution. Watershed institution is not a farmer-producer organization. So we need to understand this very clearly. Okay, I can give you other, but I think this answers partly your question.
Thank you, sir. Any of the audience who would like to ask the question, please unmute your phone and you can ask the question now. Thank you.
Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. I hope you can hear me. So I have two questions to you. One is regarding Devdasi and Myra project that you have done, which I think is fantastic. So when you reflect on these projects, do you think there is something that you wish you could have done better? That is my question number one. And another question is regarding the loan disbursement to self-help groups. So how did you take care of fraud and default risk when you disburse the bank loans to self-help groups and from self-help groups to different parties?
One regarding Devadasi and Mayraga, reflect
Regarding
which done better. Which whether you reflect whether you would think now something you've
I'm
done
not
better.
clear on your first question. It was regarding Devadasis and Mairada.
Reflect which done better. Now what you are thinking something you could have done better.
Oh, what we could have done better with the Devadasis, is it?
Yes, both Myra and Devdasi. Yes, that's true.
Well, what could we have done better? Fortunately, we didn't take up the strategy that the government had given us, namely to set up a colony. So we revised the whole strategy. But what we could have done better, I guess there are a lot of things we could have done better. Because to begin with, we were trying to train our staff, at the same time do the work. And this would really, because we did not have previous experience in how to get people to change their attitudes. We did not have experience in how to get the Devadasis really to control their dedication. So this was for us the first experience. So we sort of playing catch up. And maybe it would have been more effective if we knew what the problems were before we went into the whole picture. But structurally, we did the right thing. We changed the strategy. Otherwise, we would have just been wasting our time. How could we have implemented our strategy better? Yes, we could have. But I cannot just give you the answer now because we ended this project about 15 years ago. But the project is still there, functioning with the help of MAS. The second question is?
How do you do fraud, default, mismanagement in the bank loans of SAGs?
Achha, how do we manage frauds and well, in the real SA, let me tell you, this SAG groups has undergone a tremendous change since the mid 80s when we started to what it is today. That's the first statement. When we started, it was a people's institution. It was they set the agenda. They set the size of each loan. They set the interest rates. They set even the recovery period and the repayment. And they did. They did. And there was no problem. They solved the problem. Their recovery rate was 99%, because they were the Facebook of the 80s. They knew every single member. So they knew how much to give them, how much to lend them, whether they were using it properly or not. I used to call them the Facebook of the 80s. So we really had no problem. What happened is when they have now become very much part of the delivery system of the government. Government says do this, do that, become part of the this food distribution system and all that. That's not their job. They didn't want that. But if they've become part of the distribution, and secondly, they have taken on the picture, the image of being financial intermediaries. They didn't start as financial intermediaries. They started because they were not getting benefits from the cooperatives. So, and they were involved in a host of other things. In health, they were involved in fighting for the more level playing field. So, what has happened today is totally something different. So, the problems today are many. To recover money from the SAGs, there are two. It's either the microfinance institutions; they have to send their staff there, they have to collect the members at one place, and they have to collect the money. There's very little pressure from the group. See, formerly the self-help groups used to borrow from the bank after 1992 when we instituted the SAG bank linkage. Say they borrowed at 10% and lent at 12 or 13%. So they kept 3% with them to cover certain of defaults and certain problems. So the loans itself were about 13%, which was not bad. You could take loans for 13%, invest in agriculture. Today, when MFIs are lending at over 20%, they're pretty high cost loans. And they're getting them because they have to go and collect the money. So their staff have to be paid. With the self-help groups, we never sent any staff to collect the money. They deputed every week one member to go to the bank, deposit the money and to bring the money. And that also helped each individual member woman to go and establish relations with the bank. And they gradually opened accounts in the bank. So Myrada had no staff to distribute the loans and collect the loans. It was done entirely by the self-help groups. So it was a total different pattern the way it started. Today, the ratio of defaults and sort of other things come in. We never had, when the SAGs were running by the people, where people took responsibility, even when there was a waiver of loan waiver, it didn't affect us at all. It didn't affect the self-help groups at all because it's their money. And out of 100 rupees, let us say in a self-help group, 30% was their savings, about 20% was interest on the loans, and 50% was loans. So their equity was in the group fund. Have I tried to explain this to you?
Yes, all clear, sir. Thank you so much.
This is Prabjot. I have a question. Like we are talking about building of the institutions. So I would just like to know, like in your opinion, what is the strategy that we can adopt, or what are the parameters that we can have to exit an institution to make it a sustainable one? So if you have any experience in your if you have got any experience in your lifelong, so I would just like to know about that. That what are the strategies that we can adopt to make it a sustainable one? Thank you.
Okay. Well, there is no strategy. As I told you, we have several modules. We have a training manual, which if you want you can get, which helps you to train the self-help groups over a period of a year or 1.5 years. So I don't know if you can call that a strategy. The strategy is enshrined in the way the modules are designed and the way the modules are done. So it is an intensive training program, just like you have anywhere else. So management You learn how to manage yourself, how to manage your group, how to manage your resources. Building an institution is about all that. How do you manage the institution? How do you meet regularly? How do you keep records? How do you keep accounts? How do you discuss? How do you participate? How do you analyze the world around you? So it's a strategy of building an institution is to help the members of the institution to understand what the institution requires to be an institution.
She's also asking, how do you make them self-reliant so that you can step away?
How do you make them self-reliant? By keeping away from them. If you want, it's always the question is always how do we make people? How do people are self-reliant? Get away from them. Allow them to. They have strengths. I've been saying this all the time. Look for people's strengths and build on them. Don't work on people's lack of self-reliance. I often say, if people had no self-reliance and had no strengths, they would have been dead long ago. They have survived, and if they can survive in scarce resources, they are definitely better managers than I am. So try to look at people's strengths and let us not try to look at what we can do for them. Let us try to see what are their strengths and how we can help them to realize the potential of these strengths. How do you build the affinity? There's affinity already there. We didn't put it there. It existed like a diamond in the mud. We just happened to kick it. What we did is polish it. So from the relations of affinity, we polished it. We trained them how to manage funds, how to meet, how to discuss, how to solve problems. That's all we did.
Any questions, sir? Yes.
There's some question. In agriculture, farmers bear the loss, occasional profits, second farmers. By banker, case banker, wage loans from Divya. So what do you want? Many times women self-employed find difficult fulfilling government formalities. There are frequent changes in process. Hold their hands, improving managerial skills. Correct. Fix our exit strategies. Their dependence or outside support. Break them. All I agree with you. Farmers bear the loss, occasional profits related to farming. Yes, that's the list that we have been telling you. And how do you cope with this? But then I'll have to go to the whole agricultural strategy, which perhaps.
Sir, I have one question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so looks like all this work, what you have done, it's all about convincing people and making them realize what would work in their benefit. So my question is related to Myrada's own staff. How were you able to motivate them? Because the biggest challenge which we have in corporate world right now is we are not able to motivate people to do the tasks. So here,
Not able to motivate people to do the task.
How do you staff your
Yeah.
to do the work? Yeah.
See, you have to decide how to motivate people. To me, when we started 82, we were struggling for money. I had to borrow money from Syndicate Bank, thanks to and buy an office in 1982. So it was a struggle for us. We had no big company to help us. But when we started getting people to help us, I had 5 lakhs. And the land next door to us was costing 5 lakhs. So my staff, said, sir, why don't we buy that land? We can put up a building there. And I said, well, I'll give you another option. I want to spend this 5 lakhs on training all the staff we have recruited. So they had a discussion. My board said, buy the land. And I said, I will invest it in the staff. And I did it. And we developed a very nice in-house management training, called it Development Professional Management Training, which gave us about 60 to 80 core staff. We had a total staff about 800. And I'm not talking about field women staff who were there. About 60 to 80 core staff who really shared the vision of Myrada. I'm not saying the 1 or 2 were not defaulters, yes, but the vision was there, honesty was there, willingness was there. and willingness to work in the field was there, to live in the field was there. We made some we had vehicles at one time. We had about 300 motorcycles, I think, a few jeeps. We gave them accommodation in the field, and we helped their children to go to school. All that we did. But it was not easy. Many of them could have got better jobs, so no doubt about that. And some have gone. But some of them spent 10 years. From Irma, we had quite a few. They spent 10 years with us, 15 years with us, then went on. But some stayed with us. And, but so it's a question of how do you get people to share something? And secondly, also, before I joined Myrada, I spent 1 week with Vinoba Bhave. He gave us, we a few of us, they gave us 3 bits of advice. One, he said, your fellows are, you're well qualified, you can earn money, but please, in development, you'll have problems. So please see that your wife has a place to stay and some transport. They are not interested in what you're doing. Secondly, he says, you need occasionally spend some time, all of you spend a few days as consultants somewhere, you earn some money, keep them happy. And thirdly, he said, but your take home salary should not be 3 times more than your staff, 3 times or 4 times more than your staff, than your driver. Your take home salary should not be 3 or 4 times greater than your driver. And for 28 years, I kept that. So you need to really see how you bring all these things together and motivate staff. Training, vision building, and sharing. It's a question of sharing with them.
Okay, that helps. Thanks a lot.
Exit strategy. Yes, sure. I think this exit strategies is fine. You should exit from day one. Very often we think of exiting at the end of the project. No, we should begin by saying that we are here to make you the leader of the project. That attitude is important. Handover. Myrada has handed over all the sub offices that we had, which are our extension staff. When we withdraw, we hand them all over to the people's groups. We have self-help groups. Then we have what we call community managed resource centers, which are federations of about 100 self-help groups and watershed associations. And we have handed over all our equipment and building to them. And they are self-reliant. They charge for services. They run the show. And then so the issue is that from the word go, you have to plan to exit. But we remain in the project as we are the last resort in the area. We are there in the area. Our campuses, our training campuses remain in the area. So people can come to us for anything. The exit strategy should be there from day one.
Thank you, sir. Next question, please.
And this is why some people are not, agencies are not successful, because they do a lot of work, but they do a lot of work to establish their own institutions in this work. We should really work so that we don't establish our institutions. It's the people's institutions that are important.
Do we have any other question? Well, sir, I think we have a little time in hand. You were mentioning about the agricultural strategy. Would you like to take a few minutes to throw some light on that?
That is very dangerous. Talk about agriculture for a few minutes. So, and it's such a broad strategy. I like to keep away from it. I was on the preparation for the 12th plan in the agricultural group, so I can talk about that from today till day after tomorrow. But making comments just now off the cuff are not very, I think, appropriate. You excuse me for that. I can make, but it will take half an hour to give you a balanced statement of what I on agriculture. So sorry, I know you're tempting me, and I'm very much tempted, but
no, I understand. It's a stroke you can play very well, but maybe we'll keep it for some other time. Not an issue. Yeah.
Sir, one question.
Please.
Which you think are the emerging areas to make a difference in the life of the poor? in the context of the thing that poor are still poor, what are the emerging areas we should take address now?
Difference
Life
in the
of the-
life of a poor, emerging area, we should take attention of.
What is the difference in the life of the poor when some years, I'm not clear on that.
Emerging area, we should address.
Vikas, what is it?
Emerging area,
To
we
make
should
the
address.
difference in the life of the poor, which emerging areas we need to address? We have addressed a lot on SHGs, then small and marginal farmers, but still we are not able to bring them up.
Need to address. Emerging area, we need to address of the life of the poor.
See, I'm not certain what you mean by emerging areas. If you mean like emerging economies, it's a big issue. We have emerging areas of different types in one state even. So I'm really not certain what you mean by emerging. I have to make it very specific because we have
Mr.
Chenchu tribal
Fernandez,
in our
Mr.
state
Fernandez,
next.
he's saying the poor are still poor, even though we have done so much work for them. So what should we start focusing on in today's context?
Oh, I got you. Thank you. I think to say the poor are still poor is a very general statement. People have come out of poverty by the millions, and I can give you statistics. There's no two ways about it. I've seen it all around. And I mean, I'm talking about the southern states. There's absolutely no doubt that poverty people are no longer poor. They've come up in life, and I have seen people what they were 30 years ago and what they are today. There's no two ways about it. That's the first question. Second question is there is vulnerability, I agree, especially after the impact on COVID and all that lockdown we've had. It has pushed back people into poverty. So there's vulnerability, I do not. So I think the issue is much more on vulnerability than poverty, at least in the southern states, including Gujarat, Maharashtra, and some parts of the north, Punjab. Vulnerability is more important than poverty. Poverty is an issue in many of the eastern states. I'm not denying that. But so we have to look at specifically. For example, if you look at some northern states, there is a level of poverty. I'm not saying no, chiefly in northeastern states. So there are specific projects, specific strategies for them which in agriculture especially we could do. There is very little done in agriculture in Bihar and Orissa and some part in West UP. A lot of things could be done even in agriculture. Soils are good, water is good, a lot of things are done. So I think I would strongly say that the government and has done the growth has been tremendous. Vulnerability has been there, and it's very obvious in the last few years, especially this COVID and things. And maybe quite a few million people have fallen back into poverty. That I agree. So I think it's a much more complex question than and India is so diverse. Problem in Tamil Nadu is not the same as Kerala. The problem will be vast in Orissa and Bihar. So what we need in Bihar and Orissa is completely different from what you need in the south. So I think, I'm sorry, I can't talk about, give you specific responses to that.
Sir, can I just take this opportunity to maybe, request one of the other distinguished members who is on audience here, Shri Sama Sahib, to respond on this question. Sama Sahib, would you like to respond on this question on what are the emerging areas to address to lift the people out of poverty? Sama Sahib?
Many thanks to Mr. Fernandez for taking us back 40 years as far as poverty is concerned. I also started traveling in 1980s with poor people. And I think as Mr. Fernandez is telling, things have changed. Things have changed big way. And that first symptoms when we started talking in 80 to 90 were hunger, their miserableness, their no access to education, health, and they were exploited. They were last to the wall. Things have changed. Their aspirations have changed. Their expectations have changed. Now, the vulnerable groups are, I think, vulnerable groups are those which are not farmers. Even don't hold even a inch of land. They are migrants. They are in peri-urban areas or urban areas, and they are working as laborers. So that's a vulnerable group where the things are still very bad. In COVID, still much bad. I don't know. There has to be a strategy to change where we talk of the people, those who are depending on by large on urban demands, and where skilling is also very, very important. I think giving skills to these poor people is very, very important now, and they are changing. The skills need are also changing. I think that is one way we can start working with these vulnerable groups, where they are more skilled. Their handholding has to be very, very important. I think somebody has to handhold, and processes to keep a track of what exactly is happening to them and their children is also very, very important. I remember now there is one of the remarkable person who is working with you see migrant these what we call tribes. Those were tribes which were
Keep it here, Elizabeth.
locally fed tribes. And I think they are really in bad shape wherever they are. So
The bottom here, wipe this from here.
yeah, strategies has to change, and our focus has to be also changed. I think focus on what group we have now is important, because government, as far as other programs are concerned, are available. Most of them programs are available, but that last mile connectivity is still a big question. So I think there are emerging scenes, different scenes, and if we work on that, I think things can come very fast. Primary development and secondary development took a lot of time, because it was compound. They were not educated. They had no medical help. They were not able to demand. They were not able to do anything. So all that. So now that our equation is also changed, and I think our strategy is also have to change, and we have to work with that. Thanks many to Mr. Fernandez for giving a wonderful lecture. I think it was a recollection of all that what need to be done still, and continue to do building an institution. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I also take this opportunity, sir, to thank my colleagues Prabjot, Alak, Dhaval, who have put the whole thing together, and of course Tiwari Sahib to kind of lead us into this initiative of We Connect. Now, as the closure remarks, I would request Dr. Mukul Asher, who has been Professor of Public Policy Making at University of Singapore, to kindly give his closing remarks and share his observations. Mukul bhai, could you please come online?
Thank you, Vikas bhai, for giving me this opportunity. The insights that have been provided by Dr. Fernandez are very profound. And the idea that a good policy is not a good policy unless it can be implemented effectively with institutions organizations and which meets the needs the aspirations of the beneficiaries is very welcome. So he has highlighted with various examples the where the practice of development uh, is something that is not found in the textbooks on economic development. I read my first textbook on economic development in 1964 or 65 when I was a graduate student. And it was by Stephen Anke. Dr. Fernandez may remember him. And there was no mention of all these aspects as to what makes development policies effective. I would like to, however, make some complementary remarks. The experience that was narrated of the 80s and 90s. Today's environment is very different. We have digital economy, we have disruptive technologies, we have a lot more physical and digital connectivities. The aspirations are different. But the importance of institutions and trust that he talked about still remains. It may be useful to ask, what is trust? And when we talk about trust, it is at all levels. We shouldn't assume that at the local level there is trust. Just like we can't assume that in every family there is a trust relationship. There are a lot of variations. Now, in general, trust requires two aspects. The first is character, niyat. Niyat hai ki nahi hai. And lot of time that niyat comes when you don't have shraddha, you don't have saburi, and your intentions are not to be constructive to help address the problem. So the negativity, the character. And the second is the competence. And it is the both when character and competence get together, then we get trust. Now, Dr. Fernandez has rightly said that there is a lot of diversity, many different issues that arise. But we, in our development dialogues, we don't give enough emphasis to the accountability and responsibility of the states and of the urban and local bodies. To fix accountability for these policies, Dr. Sama talked about the last mile connectivity. How do we fix that accountability? Who has it? And how do we address that is an issue of reform that is every bit as important as looking at the institutions and organizations that design and implement development services. So we know that for that kind of trust and accountability that we need, there is going to be need to reform institutions. In particular, judicial reforms is long overdue. Many states don't even have published statutes of their laws. How is anybody going to do development if you don't even know what the state's laws are? That's where asymmetric information,
I just pressed it, all the water coming.
non-transparency, rent seeking, all of that tends to come in, and we need to address it. Vivek De Broy has written some very good pieces on how to do legal reform and how to reform institutions. What he says is we must start with the state reorganization. We must look at again the constitution and see where the constitution needs needs reform as well. So it shouldn't be as overwhelming discussion on the central government. And often what I read is that in the central government, on one person, the prime minister, but we don't have that more balanced view of what it takes to get reforms. The second area, if I may continue, is that one of the diversities in India is also that some states have got good social enterprise, civil society, NGO ecology. Others don't. When I was a consultant in Orissa, civil service in Orissa is supreme. There was very little civil society that you can try to work. Things may have changed. This was about 15 years ago when I was a consultant to their state government. So I think the how to develop a good social enterprise. Social enterprise is using capitalist methods to meet social needs. Okay, so that is the social enterprise, social organizations, NGOs, civil society, and there are a lot of NGOs who are absolutely useless. They work against the country, and we got to recognize it. So let's not be sentimental and use and say the civil society and NGO in a uncritical manner. My next point is about the adage, and sorry where I may have a slight change in emphasis or different emphasis than Dr. Fernandez. He's much more experienced than I am. I've always been an academic all my life, though I've done a lot of consulting with the governments, but I've been an academic, is that increasingly it is important that what gets measured gets done. And we need dashboards, we need measurement. Yes, there are some things you can't measure, but that should not be an excuse. And this reminds me when I would consult the civil servants up, my area is public financial management. And I would tell them, we need to have a government balance sheet. Does Gujarat state have a balance sheet? Does the Indian government have a balance sheet? Does Mumbai municipality have a balance sheet? No. Indian Railways is just now developing balance sheet. Then they will say, oh, we can't do balance sheet. You know, how do you value Taj Mahal? How do you value this? How do you? I said, don't give me excuses. You know, if there are some things you can't measure, keep them aside, take them in account qualitatively and do that, but measure, because what gets measured gets done. So the dashboard. To me, a good social program today, which has a wonderful dashboard, is the Jal Jeevan Yojana. You can go there, you can get on every state, every district, how many are connected with the water taps, what does it mean, and so on. You can do wonderful research based on the information. But not too many people are getting into that kind of detailed research that is needed. So in my view, we need more measurement. I mean, we didn't even know how many migrants there are, where they are. So we don't have how many labor supply. We don't have some very, very basic statistics. So we can't say, oh, you can't measure informal sector, so we don't do it, or digital economy. No, you get competent at measuring, and that creating dashboard, defining what is success in a particular project. Then you apply your qualitative analysis as well. But that should not preclude the quantitative analysis that is needed. Last point, Vikas Bhai, if I may. Last point, if I may.
Yes, sir, Mukul bhai, please. We have some time.
The last point is about, we have this romantic view on cooperatives and so much. But if we really examine very analytically, there are very few success stories of cooperatives. And when Dr. Fernandez talks about some of the powerful using the banking system, cooperative banking system, others in order to benefit themselves and so on, that has always been going on in the millennial. So we need to find either technological solutions, institution reforms, or others to try to mitigate it and to direct it in a better way. So the cooperative banks, for example, they've been taken away from RBI, who has little competence in cooperative banks supervision, and there is a new way to do it. So we should all be supporting that kind of reform where the rent seeking and other comes down. So we are now going to get transparency in LIC and Air India and others. Nobody understands LIC's balance sheet. But once it is listed, we are going to get that transparency. How many of us are willing to go out and support that? And we should not think emotionally that cooperatives are good. Very few cooperative systems have worked. Some have worked with the FPOs. Let us be hopeful that they can be structured and work in the intended way. But this is where I agree with Dr. Fernandez. We have to keep on working at them in order to make them work. So I learned a lot, and thank you very much for inviting me to the Reconnect program. Namaskar. Thank you.
Mukul bhai, thank you for a wonderful closure and summarization of all the points which were made. Fernandez sahib, I once again take the opportunity to earnestly thank you. We connected today morning on some subject, where I could understand that it was difficult for you to make it today. But thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for enlightening us. And I also thank all the participants who have joined on the call today, in spite of it being a busy day. We shall keep you posted. Normally, we do this WeConnect session once in every 3 months, once in a quarter. So we'll reach out to you probably in the month of October end or November for the next session, and we look forward to you joining us again then. I thank everyone, one and all. Thank you so much. Thanks my colleagues Prabjot, Alak, and Dhaval once again for making this happen. Thank you. Good day to you. Thank you.